COVID, hospital admissions up by nearly a third because of the Delta variant. The Prime Minister says while he thinks restrictions can still be lifted on July the 19th, he warns of a rough winter ahead for the NHS.
It is sadly going up still. It's going up by about 30% a week in cases. Hospitalisations up by roughly the same amount.
Also ahead, what happens to the stuff you don't buy? ITV News has evidence that Amazon is destroying millions of items of unsold stock. Scotland loses a star player for its crucial Euros match tomorrow. Billy Gilmour tests positive for COVID. And why English Heritage cancelled this year's summer solstice at Stonehenge on site and online.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. Hold fire on any plans that involve more restrictions being lifted early. The Prime Minister urged caution again today, saying COVID cases are rising by 30% a week, with hospital admissions going up by roughly the same amount. Boris Johnson also said the number of patients going into intensive care had risen because of the Delta variant. But he concluded July the 19th was still on course for lockdown lifting in England. Our political reporter Shihab Khan has the latest.
Slow, precise and with no room for error. That was the strategy for the Prime Minister this morning while visiting a lab in Hertfordshire. It was supposed to be Freedom Day today, but the rise of the Delta variant, which originates in India, has knocked it back. Boris Johnson is adamant that it will be on July 19th, the date he's calling Terminus Day. But could it happen sooner?
Look at the numbers of Delta, the Delta variant. It is sadly going up still. It's going up by about 30% a week in cases. Hospitalisations up by roughly the same amount. And so sadly, ICU admissions into intensive care. So we've got to be cautious, but we'll be following the data the whole time.
The delay in the easing of lockdown restrictions means that nightclubs like this one in London have had to stay closed. Luca Maggiore, the owner of the Cuckoo Club, says the pandemic has contributed to him being in £700,000 of debt.
We've been closed since 22nd of March 2020. It's been 15 months. We didn't really have almost any help, and we feel we are completely forgotten.
But some places have been able to partially reopen. The London Coliseum normally holds 2,300 people, but at tonight's performance, the current restrictions limit that to only 1,000.
I think financially it's been catastrophic for people, but at the same time what we've got to do is now work out how do we get the business back together, back on its feet and welcome people back into the theatre again.
Scientists are, however, warning that easing restrictions too early could have serious consequences.
Spread of Delta variant is still looking very, very worrying, and I see no particular reason for any renewed optimism at the moment. There's a danger that we fuel a kind of fairly major third wave and start to see all those consequences of an overstretched NHS and overstretched hospitals.
That's something the Prime Minister will want to avoid, and he'll be looking closely at all the facts and figures before determining the best course of action in the coming weeks.
Plenty of caution then from scientists and also the Prime Minister this morning. He was also, Shihab, asked about this prospect, this talk, this speculation of if you've had 2 jabs, you might be released from isolation early. What did he have to say about that?
Well, he said he was looking at it, and he said the government was looking at it, and I think that's the key thing here. There's a balancing act to do. You heard from the Prime Minister in that report. There are concerns about the increase in the number of cases of the Delta variant, but at the same time, 31 million people in the United Kingdom have had 2 jabs, and there are plenty of people wondering why that means they can't go do specific things. And the Prime Minister said they were looking at it. There was no precise details of what exactly that meant. We just know that it is under consideration, and he was quite clear that so many people in the UK have been vaccinated vaccinated, there is something that could potentially be done there. When it comes to holidays, which I know plenty of people are thinking about, especially as we approach the summer, the Prime Minister was clear that this year would be difficult for travel. There would be delays, there would be disruption, and we know that the government's border policy is something that's been debated a fair bit. Now, Number 10 have said that public health remains the priority and that you can go on holiday to green list destinations. But again, people are wondering whether or not there'll be different rules if you've had 2 jabs, and we're going to have to wait and see whether that changes.
Shihab Khan, thank you. Let's get the latest then from one of our regular epidemiologists, Dr. Deepti Gurdrasani. Thank you very much for joining us this lunchtime. How concerned are you about the numbers that Boris Johnson has given us today, that hospital admissions are rising by around 30% in a week, similar to the amount of COVID cases themselves, and also this rise in the number of people ending up in ICU with the Delta variant?
I mean, it is very concerning and shows that the link between cases and hospitalizations, certainly, although it may have been weakened, hasn't been broken to the extent that we won't see pressure on the NHS. And we are seeing an increase in hospitalizations and even an early increase in deaths under 65 years of age. And both of those things are very concerning. Our cases are rising quite rapidly. We have a doubling time of about 11 days, which means that the situation is very likely going to get worse over the coming weeks unless we do something to prevent it. And the focus shouldn't be just on, Freedom Day, but rather what we do at this point in time to prevent the situation getting much worse. We know there's a lot of spread, for example, happening in schools in Manchester. We know there are about 1,000 children or more who are off for COVID-related reasons. And we can take simple measures right now to make these environments safer and reduce the spread, which would go a long way to reducing the numbers of hospitalizations and deaths and also the people living with long COVID.
Yeah, I spoke to you a week ago about this, and it doesn't seem that anything has changed in the week in terms of changing what is happening from the government's point of view to try and slow the cases down at the moment. Look, research has shown that the symptoms for the Delta variant could differ from the original, including a runny nose and headache. Should these be included in the list that triggers someone getting tested right now?
Absolutely. So this is early research from the Zoe symptom tracker that is showing that rather than the classic symptoms of a fever, cough, which would normally trigger testing, the sort of symptoms people are reporting right now are things like headache, sore throat, cold-like symptoms, muscle pains, and fever and cough are there, but they're lower down on the list, which means that people who, for example, just have hay fever or flu-like symptoms may be infected. So it's very important to expand that eligibility definition because it's very likely we're not picking up a lot of cases. And if we don't pick up cases, then we won't be able to break those chains of transmission.
And just briefly, there is some anecdotal evidence that the Delta variant, the one that is absolutely dominant in this country right now, it reacts differently on lateral flow tests to other variants. What can you tell us about that?
So the data from Public Health England so far don't seem to suggest that there should be reduced accuracy of this particular variant because of the mutations in it. I mean, certainly we know the accuracy of tests depends on the level of virus levels in the throat. So if there are people with lower virus levels in throat, that is less likely to be detected. So we know, for example, the sensitivity of these tests may be 40 to 50% in general compared to our normal PCR tests. And even in people with high virus loads, they could reach about 70%, especially if they're not being tested by experts and being sort of self-tested or done by people who don't have the expertise in this.
The numbers are ever changing, aren't they, as this virus continues to wreak havoc on all of our lives. Dr. Gurdrasani, thank you very much for your latest thoughts. Thank you. An ITV News undercover investigation has revealed evidence that Amazon is destroying millions of items of unsold stock every year, products that are often new and unused. We've seen televisions, laptops, top-of-the-range headphones and thousands of sealed face masks, all being sorted into boxes marked destroy at a warehouse in Dunfermline in Scotland. Our business correspondent Richard Pallow is here. Why are these items being thrown away, being disposed of, being destroyed?
Well, Amazon's entire business model relies on availability and speed of delivery. So if you're a vendor, you pay to store with them. The longer those goods remain unsold, the higher the cost of those prices. At a point it will become uneconomical to do that. That is the centre that these pictures come from in Dunfermline. There you can see a smart TV, a drill. This is an astonishing level of waste. This is stuff that is all marked for destroy. You've got shavers, you've got headphones there, earrings. I mean, the list is endless. Steel cutlery, etc., etc. And we tracked the lorries out of here to see where they went. Now, one arrived at a waste centre, another arrived at a landfill site. What happens from there is still somewhat of a grey area. But it's the first time that such waste on such a massive scale has been documented in the UK in this way. And the government say that electronic waste and dealing with it is one of their stated priorities going forward. This is what they had to say to me this morning.
Yeah, I think I'm very concerned. As I said, I want to read the reports. I want to get to the bottom of what's actually happening. But it is a matter of concern, and we've got to look at what kind of response we can make to stop or prevent this sort of thing happening.
Indeed, in the last few minutes, the Prime Minister has told us that he thinks it's a bad indictment of consumerist society, that he wants to take it up with Amazon immediately. Some strong words.
OK. And what's Amazon said in response to this investigation?
Well, it's important to point out what they're doing is not illegal. They've given us a statement this morning saying that we're working towards a goal of zero product disposal, and our priority is to resell, donate to charitable organisations or recycle any unsold products. No items are sent to landfill in the UK. As a last resort, we will send items to energy recovery, but we're working hard to drive down the number of times this happens to zero. Now, in one spreadsheet we saw from April, they did donate stuff. We saw around 27,000 items being donated. In comparison, the items marked for destroy were 124,000. This is all very embarrassing for the government ahead of a huge climate change conference in November, and I think this is something they need to get a handle on pretty quickly. OK,
Richard, thank you very much. And there'll be much more on this investigation on our later programmes today, so do look out for Richard's work later. A public inquiry into what's been described as the worst treatment disaster in the NHS heard today about some of the youngest victims. The investigation into the contaminated blood scandal of the 1970s and 80s is hearing evidence from a school for disabled children where at least 72 pupils died after being given a treatment that was contaminated with HIV and hepatitis. Sangeeta Lal was listening to this morning's evidence. What was said, Sangeeta?
So today we've been hearing from former pupils of Treelaws College, which was a specialist school that also treated haemophiliac pupils that were there. Now, this has been a long-running inquiry. This morning, though, we heard about how that treatment merged with the school, but also how the school was set up and why, which was essentially to give children who had illnesses a chance to not miss out on their education when they were receiving their treatment. But in the 1980s, students received blood products from the NHS. Those blood products contained HIV and hepatitis and infected many. Out of around 89 pupils that were there during that time, less than a quarter are still alive. Today we heard from one of those, Gary Webster, who says he just wants to know who made the decisions that led to the outcomes.
I'd like to know what happened, who made the decisions, why there was a so-called cover-up, and why our parents weren't informed when we were under the responsibility of Treelaws. They were never contacted throughout the years.
Now, one of the main points that was discussed this morning was about the communication between the haemophiliac centre in the school and parents. Now, in 1956, the first haemophiliac pupils started to arrive there. By the 1970s, more than 2,000 transfusions were being given annually. But the inquiry was discussing this morning about the lack of communication between the school and parents. It's one of the latest pieces of information to come out of the inquiry, but it could be a vital detail as the inquiry continues.
Sangeeta Lal, thank you. Still to come, bad news for Scotland as a key player tests positive for COVID, and why Solstice seekers couldn't celebrate as they'd planned as the sun came up this morning. Next, this lunchtime, there's been a huge rise in thefts of catalytic converters from cars. Why? Well, some of the metals in them are valuable. According to new figures from police forces across England, Wales and Northern Ireland, thefts have surged by more than 100% between 2019 and 2020. The biggest rise was in North Wales, where thefts were up by 400%. And it's thought older hybrids such as the previous generation of the Toyota Prius and Aureus and the Honda Jazz are most at risk. The research was published in the consumer magazine Which. From there, Lisa Barber joins me now. Lisa, how easy is it for thieves to steal your car's catalytic converter?
Hi Nina, it's really quick and straightforward, unfortunately. It takes thieves under a minute in order to steal one. Basically, organised crime gangs are targeting these older hybrids because of the concentration of precious metals in the catalytic converters. I mean, one of those is rhodium, where the cost of that has gone up by over 450% in the last year. An ounce of rhodium actually costs about £21,000, which you can get a new car for that.
Goodness. So if it takes less than a minute, you don't know that that's happened. You get in your car the next morning and it doesn't start. Is there anything you can tell people to do to try to protect their vehicles?
Yeah, certainly. First of all, remember it's the older hybrids that they're targeting. So if you do own one of these models, be careful about where you're parking. Basically, make it harder for thieves to get in under the back of your car. If you can, park up tight against a wall or a car behind you, obviously don't block them in. If you've got a locked garage, use it. You could invest in a cat lock. These cost about £200 and basically weld the catalytic converter onto your car. But again, this is only going to slow the thieves down. It won't stop them totally. Toyota, a lot of Toyota cars have been targeted because they're really popular cars, basically. Toyota, full marks to them. They've been investing in smart water technology so that they can mark up catalytic converters and ultimately trace them back. Well, one thing I would be saying to anyone, if you're a victim of this, please do report it. We get a massive sense of injustice from people where the thieves can't be tracked down for their car. But the more people report it, the better a pattern the police can identify and go after the gangs that are doing this.
OK, Lisa Barber, thank you very much for all that information and advice. Thank you. A New Zealand weightlifter is set to make history after being confirmed as the first transgender athlete to ever compete at the Olympics. Officials have selected Laurel Hubbard to compete for her country's women's team at the delayed Tokyo 2020 Games after qualifying requirements were recently modified. And officials in Tokyo have announced that up to 10,000 fans will be allowed at Olympic events next month, but organisers warn that the competition could be moved behind closed doors if COVID infections surge. To the Euros now, and tomorrow is the big night for England and Scotland after Wales qualified for the next round yesterday. In a moment, we'll speak to our sports editor Steve Scott at Wembley. First to Geraint Vincent at Hampden Park, because Scotland have had some bad news this morning. Geraint, one of Scotland's star players, has tested positive for COVID.
Yeah, real blow, Nina, to Scottish hopes ahead of a game that they must win here against Croatia tomorrow night. Ask any Scottish fan who's the player that makes their heart beat a little bit faster, and most will tell you Billy Gilmour, the 20-year-old Chelsea midfielder, was man of the match in the game against England on Friday night, and his composure and confidence in midfield a big reason why the Scots managed to get a result at Wembley. A statement from Scotland's training base this morning in Darlington. It says, having liaised with Public Health England since the positive test was recorded, Billy will now self-isolate for 10 days and therefore miss tomorrow's game. I think we can have a look now at some pictures of the squad training this morning. We understand that no other players are having to self-isolate as a result of close contact with Gilmour. But if Scotland do beat Croatia tomorrow and they progress to the last 16, then those games are going to be played this weekend or the first 2 days of next week, when Billy Gilmour will still be self-isolating. So protocol being followed, of course, but in the first place, this really is a terrible disappointment for a very talented young player who's going to miss out now on the chance to represent his country again on the biggest stage in this tournament. Yeah, absolutely. Geraint, thank you. Steve, look, England, as we all remember, only played Scotland on Friday. Are there any concerns about COVID cases in Gareth Southgate's squad?
Well, there was, of course, because it was only a few days ago that they faced Scotland. But yesterday, the entire team and all the support staff, everyone in their bubble, took COVID tests, and every single one of them came back negative. So that was a headache that Gareth Southgate didn't have. He does have another type of headache, and that's his team selection tomorrow. We already know one name on the list, his captain, Harry Kane. He says it's nonsense that he would even consider dropping him. But what does he do elsewhere? You have to remember that against Scotland, England only had one shot on target in the entire game, and Gareth Southgate is really picking from a world-class squad, and they've yet to get firing as yet. So I think tomorrow's selection is a very important selection for Gareth Southgate. If England win tomorrow, they do top the group and they come back to Wembley the following week. If they draw, then it's off to Copenhagen the next week. If they lose, well, then it's a bit of a lottery. They could still qualify, but it all depends on results elsewhere.
Steve Scott, Thank you very much. And you can watch England versus the Czech Republic tomorrow at 8 p.m. on ITV and Scotland's game against Croatia at the same time on ITV4 and STV. Sunrise today on the longest day began at 4:52 this morning at Stonehenge, but for the second year running, the summer solstice celebration was cancelled due to the pandemic. Instead, it was supposed to be streamed live online, but that was also cancelled. Sally Biddulph explains why.
As the sun rose on the summer solstice, webcams were trained on Stonehenge for a virtual celebration of the longest day. But look carefully between the Neolithic rocks. Flashes of high-vis jackets as police and security patrol the site. People asked to stay away because of COVID. And then this. A solitary figure climbs on top of the rock in the middle bottom of your screen and dances to welcome midsummer. The feed is then cut. And this is why. A large group of people climbed over fences to gather for an event central to the pagan and druid calendar. They brought sleeping bags, warm clothes and a party atmosphere, determined to be there and celebrate.
We have a live stream for people who like to have their moment for solstice at Stonehenge, and we think that they tune in for a peaceful view of that, so we just need to bear their interests in mind if an incident like this happens.
Steeped in myth and mystery, Stonehenge has been synonymous with the summer solstice for centuries, regularly attracting 30,000 people. The sun rises behind the heel stone at the circle entrance, channeling sunlight into the centre. Today, though, it was overcast and there was little to see, even less when the feed was cut. Restored 10 minutes later once the sun was up and the crowds dispersed. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
And finally, commiserations for the amateur cricketer Asif Ali, whose spectacular six in yesterday's match is making the news for all the wrong reasons. The Illingworth St Mary's Cricket Club player thought he'd caught the ball perfectly as it sailed beyond the boundary. Unfortunately, he parked his car just next to the pitch, and to the amusement of many of his teammates, the ball came down straight onto his back window. How's that? That's all we've got time for now. Join Mary at the later time of 7:30 tonight for the ITV Evening News from me. Bye-bye.